Hi all. Recently I was reading an op-ed in dawn.com by Ijaz Heather. Heather writes about the recently concluded Gaza peace plan, and he is very critical of this plan, rightfully so, because it doesn't really offer the Palestinians anything more than a possibly very temporary end to their genocide. Now, I feel very sorry for the Palestinians of Gaza, just like all non psychopathic humans. However, I couldn't help thinking about something quoted in the article. This was something said by Mohammed bin Salman, the Saudi ruler, who said in the last several decades the Palestinian leadership have missed one opportunity after another. Now, I am no fan of MBS, but I had to think that, well, maybe here he does have a point. This is the UN partition plan of 1948 for British Mandate Palestine. The areas in yellow are the ones offered to the Arab side who rejected the plan. This is what is commonly referred to as the occupied territories of the West Bank and Gaza. Notice something? The occupied territories of West Bank and Gaza are smaller than the territory that was offered to the Arabs back in 1948. If they had accepted the plan, the Palestinians would have had a state in 1948 larger than what they themselves accepted later at Oslo in 1993 as their desired territory for a future Palestinian state. I have to say that the Zionists have always had a certain hard headed pragmatism which the Palestinian Arab leadership has lacked. It's the approach which says, let's take what we can right now, let's try for more later, let's not sacrifice the possible for the ideal. And this brings me to another point. Between 1948 and 1967, the occupied territories were not occupied by Israel. These were controlled by Arabs, Jordan in the West Bank and Egypt in Gaza. Why did they not declare an independent Palestinian state then in those territories? Instead, Jordan annexed the West Bank and Egypt annexed Gaza. Now, you could say, of course, that, well, this is really more the fault of Jordan and Egypt, and that's true. But the PLO, which was formed in 1964, never really declared an intent to establish an independent Palestinian state in those territories either. There was another thing that I was thinking about. Would we all agree that Singapore today is a successful, prosperous state? Now, it so happens that the population of Singapore is the same as the Palestinian population of the West Bank and Gaza, about 6 million. The West Bank and Gaza are small, but Singapore is absolutely tiny. Look at this projection. That in blue is more than the land territory of Singapore. So, on a territory which is only about 20% of the West Bank and Gaza, roughly the same number of people are resident, and it is universally considered as a wonderful place to live in. That finally brings me to Oslo. What the hell sort of agreement was that from the Palestinian perspective? The Palestinians gave complete recognition to their oppressor and walked away with essentially nothing more than a contract to serve as Israel's security managers in the occupied territories. WTF. You don't have to take my word for it. The great Egyptian academic and activist Edward Said was a huge critic of this agreement as well. If instead the Palestinian leadership had gone into that negotiation with that hard headed pragmatism that I keep mentioning, they could have possibly recognized that, hey, it sucks. They took most of our land, drove most of us out, but we are not getting stronger and they are not getting weaker. It's quite the opposite. What matters more in the end? Old buildings and old land, which is not unimportant, but when you have very few choices and all of them are bad, what matters more? Doesn't the life and the future of your children matter more? And this finally brings me to something which is undeniable. I myself am Pakistani. I really cannot visit the areas in India where my grandparents lived for much of their lives, where my parents were born. And so I am also, in that sense, removed from my land of origin. However, there is a huge difference between me and the refugees of Palestine, in Lebanon, in Jordan, in Syria. The difference, of course, that I have always had a state. I have always had a passport. And in the modern nation state system, of course, to not have a state is a huge disadvantage. On the other hand, people choose all the time to go and live in places where their parents have never even visited, and then they go on to have happy, successful lives. It's called immigration. So, what really matters more, end of the day? Sure, I'm not proposing a Palestinian state in Greenland, but given a set of bad choices, what should a leadership which is really sincere to its own people decide to do? Of course, we all decry the Israeli atrocities in Palestine. However, the reality is that now, so many decades later, we can all keep crying horse, but only more and more Palestinians are being killed, and they are only further away from their dream of an independent state. Some time ago, I heard an analogy about the Israeli Palestinian dispute, which I thought was quite clever, but I now think was incomplete. The analogy is that the Israeli Palestinian dispute is really like two guys fighting over a pizza while one of them keeps eating the pizza. I think the part that's missing is that while one of them, the bigger one, keeps eating the pizza, the smaller, weaker one refuses to take whatever he can of the pizza until the bigger one has already eaten that part as well.